For more original stories, subscribe to Audio Tales. Now, let's begin this one. They threw him out like trash. 17 years. No warning. No thanks. Just a locked account and a vacant chair. They thought he'd vanish. He didn't, because while they were busy replacing loyalty with dashboards and cutting corners for speed, he was quietly keeping receipts, not out of bitterness, but precision. And what he uncovered? It would shake the company to its foundations. But this isn't a revenge story. This is a story about quiet power, about what happens when dignity outlasts applause, and when it was all over. He didn't just come back. He built something better, and became the kind of boss they never had the patience to be. They didn't even look me in the eye when they handed me the envelope. 17 years. And they slid my dismissal across the table like a bill at a cheap diner. I'm Michael Travers, former head of operations at Loring & Vale, a mid-sized logistics firm with grand ambitions and an even grander ego problem. I was their first hire after funding. First to walk into that gutted warehouse when all they had was a pitch deck and 2 overconfident co-founders. I was 36 then, not the scrappy startup type, not hungry for glory. I had just come off a messy divorce, had a daughter starting school, and needed stability, something I could build and believe in. Loring & Vale needed someone who knew how to scale without crashing, who could turn paper plans into functional systems. That was me. For 17 years, I gave them everything. Late nights that turned into sunrises, holiday meals eaten cold on plastic plates while I was elbow-deep in shipment reroutes. I kept things moving when we lost contracts, when servers collapsed, when payroll came within hours of default, and I never once raised my voice about credit, even when strategies I built were paraded as someone else's vision, even when I started getting excluded from pitch meetings, investor dinners, future leadership retreats. I told myself it was fine. I didn't need applause. I had legacy. But legacy doesn't sign your severance check. The morning they let me go, the office was unusually quiet. That kind of brittle quiet where everyone already knows. I walked in to muted greetings, colleagues glancing up from screens but avoiding my eyes. There was a new HR rep in the room, young, nervous, reciting a speech clearly practiced in the mirror. Michael, the company's undergoing restructuring. Your role is being dissolved. We want to thank you for your contributions. I remember the smell of the room. Stale coffee, synthetic carpet, that faint citrus cleaner they used when they wanted to impress investors. I remember the weight of the chair beneath me. The metal felt colder than usual. What I don't remember is speaking. I just listened. I don't think I blinked. I didn't ask why. Didn't protest. I already knew. They didn't want experience anymore. They wanted noise, hype. Younger guys with polished resumes and nothing in their eyes but ambition. I was a steady drumbeat in a room chasing fireworks, and I'd become a reminder of how the company used to be, of the boring bones underneath its pretty skin. Still, they expected me to flinch, maybe cry, maybe beg, but I only nodded. Folded the letter once, slid it into my coat. Walked out. The sidewalk outside felt like another planet. June's sun, but the air was sharp. My chest was tight, not with panic, but a strange lightness. Like I'd just finished holding something heavy for too long and didn't realize the strain until it was gone. I wandered for hours that day, past the old train yards I used to map deliveries through, past the rusted fence where we first sketched the layout for our logistics terminal on a fast food napkin. The city hadn't changed, but I had. And somewhere between that long walk and the dusk that followed, I felt something shift. Not rage, not grief, just resolve. I knew things. Things they had long forgotten I knew. Not just about the systems I built, or the vendors I quietly managed, or the budgetary holes I patched without glory. I knew about the blind spots, the cracks beneath the surface, the overpromised margins, the underreported failures swept under buzzwords. I had the receipts. Not metaphorically, literally. They never bothered to change my back-end access. The funny thing about building something from scratch is, you remember everything. Not just the wins, but the wiring, the stress points, where the bodies are buried. I was the one who convinced them not to outsource logistics to a third-party broker in year 2. I built the internal distribution pipeline that made our unit economics bulletproof during the 2012 fuel crisis. I wrote the original SOPs, vetted the first security protocols, and sat through every early supplier negotiation with pen and paper because we couldn't afford lawyers yet. Didn't build a company, I built a spine. But it was a quiet kind of leadership. I never played politics, never lobbied for titles. In fact, for the first 9 years, my email signature just read operations. That was it. While the founders chased VC buzzwords and magazine covers, I built warehouses, scaled fulfillment centers, hired teams, trained them, and stayed late to make sure nobody else got burned out. I didn't ask for more. Maybe that was the mistake. I remember once, during a snowstorm, I hand-delivered a critical batch of customs paperwork to the airport so a shipment of medical equipment wouldn't get stuck in a frozen terminal. No one thanked me, but the team hit their target. We moved fast back then, too fast to realize how fragile we were becoming. The first real sign that something was shifting came when they brought in Bryce, a strategic consultant with perfect teeth and a watch that cost more than my car. He walked through the office like he already owned it. Loud voice, big ideas, no substance. But the founders loved him. He said all the things they wanted to hear, about disruption, vertical integration, aggressive growth. I knew what it meant. I'd seen it before. When a company stops listening to the people who built it and starts chasing people who can pitch it better, you're on the clock. Bryce started questioning our legacy infrastructure, said it was mature but inflexible. That was code for, let's gut this and rebuild it my way. I watched as meetings I used to lead became meetings I wasn't invited to. My reports were filtered through new channels. Junior hires, who used to ask for my feedback, now avoided eye contact. But I kept my posture steady. There was one Friday afternoon, early winter, the kind that turns your fingertips raw before sundown. I walked past the main boardroom and saw them laughing. Bryce, one of the co-founders, and one of the directors I helped recruit. The door was slightly open. Michael's still clinging to the old ways, Bryce was saying. He's not the future, someone replied. They all laughed. I didn't walk in, didn't say a word. I went back to my desk, opened my files, and started organizing, because when you've been treated like a ghost long enough, you learn to move like one. They thought I wasn't paying attention. They were wrong. I began downloading what I could. Files, audit logs, vendor, records, back-end logs from our distribution algorithm. Everything I had built or touched had a signature, mine, and everything they were quietly unraveling was still dependent on it. They didn't even bother to change access credentials after I left, so I watched, quietly, and in that quiet I began to see something deeper, something worse than arrogance or disrespect. They were making mistakes, big ones, but it would take time to trace, and I had nothing but time now. There's a specific kind of betrayal that doesn't come with slamming doors or shouted words. It comes quietly, with calendar invites you stop receiving. It started with the project dashboards. For years I had admin-level visibility across all logistics and fulfillment workflows. I needed it. I was the one who designed the architecture. One Monday, I logged in and saw my permissions had been downgraded. I couldn't even see the system logs. No one told me. Then came the meetings. The weekly strategy calls, gone. Oh, it must have been a calendar glitch, they'd say. Eventually, the invites just stopped coming. My opinion no longer sought. My voice gently but firmly erased. I wasn't demoted, not on paper. They were just subtracting me. And subtraction, when done slowly, feels like dissolving. I began noticing the interns, the new hires from big-name schools. All flair, no grounding. They came in cocky, with prepackaged jargon and PowerPoint decks. They repeated ideas I'd written memos about 5 years earlier, now dressed in fancier fonts. No attribution. No memory. The co-founders used to come to my office after hours, back when we were building on fumes and caffeine. Now they passed my desk without looking up. One of them, Julian, actually paused once, long enough for our eyes to meet, but then he looked away, like he'd just caught sight of a photo from a past life he no longer claimed. I realized something then. Loyalty is invisible when it's quiet. They mistook my silence for irrelevance, my restraint for obsolescence. I overheard a senior product lead once, new guy, 3 months in, talking at a company happy hour. I wasn't invited, but I stopped by to grab my jacket. He was tipsy, loud, and laughing. The old guard doesn't get it. Operations thinks the company's still running on trucks and spreadsheets. I had to smile. If he only knew how close. He was to a blackout, because under the surface, the systems I built were already fraying. They'd overridden processes without understanding dependencies. They'd automated parts of the chain that were never meant to be disconnected. It was like watching someone rewire a plane mid-flight, convinced they were optimizing, unaware the engines were stalling. But I said nothing. That was my decision, my control. You don't interrupt someone determined to walk into their own fire. Instead, I began collecting, watching, not for vengeance, but evidence, because if a machine starts breaking down, you don't scream. You listen. And I'd spent my life listening to the hum of systems before they seized. And this one was humming wrong. The day I resigned, I didn't cry. I didn't fight. I just sat there, breathing in the sterile quiet of that little glass room while the junior HR rep stumbled over her script. I could feel the tremble in her voice. She was probably just following orders. I watched her hands, small, nervous, fidgeting with the clasp on her watch. She wouldn't look at me. Maybe she thought I'd break. Maybe she thought I'd argue. Make a scene? I didn't. I signed the papers, slid them back across the table with a thank you that felt heavier than it sounded. Not because I meant it, but because I needed her to remember the way I left. Calm, clear-eyed. People remember exits, not the ones with shouting and slammed doors. The ones where someone walks out without saying what they know. The elevator ride down felt longer than usual. My reflection in the mirrored wall looked tired. Not broken, just settled. Like the moment right before a storm touches water. Outside, the city felt indifferent. The kind of gray afternoon where light seems filtered through gauze. I walked to a cafe I hadn't been to in years, a quiet little spot tucked behind the freight station. It smelled like old books and cinnamon. I ordered black coffee and sat by the window. I took out the folder. Not the severance papers. The other one. The one I had been compiling for months. There were no passwords in it. No stolen documents, just screenshots, emails, invoices, versions of systems, mine, and the ones they'd started replacing them with. Cross-sections of process breakdowns, missed contract obligations, subtle manipulations of quarterly reports. I wasn't hunting for dirt. I was preserving the truth. When you build a system, you understand its tolerance. You know how many skipped steps it can survive before it collapses. They were 6 months away, maybe less. The new automated routing protocol they'd implemented? It ignored real-time traffic variances, the kind our legacy model adjusted for using third-party microdata, which they'd shut off, quietly. The procurement dashboards? Fed with outdated vendor tiers. That mistake alone would cost them $500,000 per quarter. But worse, there were gaps. Dangerous ones. Things that couldn't be fixed with a hotfix or a patch. Structural negligence, disguised as modernization. I didn't plan revenge. That's not who I am, but I did begin to design something, not a comeback, a framework, not a new version of them, something better, cleaner, honest. I had no logo, no team, no pitch, just a desk, a quiet room, and 17 years of intimate knowledge about how logistics should work, and how fragile it becomes when ego enters the engine room. I turned off my phone that night, sat in silence, let the shame, the anger, the strange sense of peace all bleed into each other. Then I opened a blank notebook and wrote one sentence. Let the collapse come, and underneath it, be ready when it does. Some men go loud when they're wronged. I went quiet. The kind of quiet you learn working around machines that can kill you if you flinch. I didn't chase rumors or bitterness. I chased patterns. By the time most people know something's wrong, the evidence is already rotting in the walls. But I knew where to look. I started with the vendors. I still had relationships. People who owed me favors or who just remembered. I treated them like humans when we were small. A few phone calls. Casual. Friendly. No pressure. But the things they told me. Unpaid invoices. Orders rerouted without notice. Logistics subcontracts signed under LLCs that didn't match any known company records. One guy, Leo, ran a freight consolidation firm we used during our expansion into the Northeast Corridor. Told me flat out. They stopped answering us. Mike. Sent a generic email about pivoting the fulfillment model and then ghosted. We're out 70 grand. That's not pivoting. That's bleeding without a tourniquet. Then came the numbers. I still had a login to our old analytics sandbox, a testing environment I built, and nobody ever sunset. They assumed it was deprecated, but it still piped in. Partial data feeds from the central logistics system, enough to see trends. Inventory cycles were misaligned. Freight costs had quietly ballooned, 22% quarter over quarter. The system was compensating by cutting routes and compressing delivery windows, which meant burnouts at the driver level and higher failure rates. It wasn't fraud exactly. It was delusion. The kind that happens when someone thinks you can replace wisdom with automation. Then I found the presentation. Someone, probably one of the interns, had left it public on the cloud server. It was a quarterly performance deck prepared for investors. I recognized parts of it immediately. Charts I had made years ago, just rebranded. But the projections were fiction. They had smoothed out the dip in delivery reliability, inflated customer retention metrics, and completely scrubbed the section. On penalty clauses from missed deadlines. They were dressing up rot in a velvet box. I didn't screenshot it, didn't save the file. I just stared at it for a long time. It wasn't personal anymore. This was something else. A company so terrified of looking weak it was willing to snap its own bones for posture. And the worst part? No one inside seemed to see it. Or they saw it and said nothing. I remember leaning back in my chair, the window open, the spring wind lifting the edges of the papers on my desk. The smell of cut grass outside. Children yelling somewhere far off. Felt not vindicated. Not yet, but aligned. They thought I'd disappear, but I was watching. Not for revenge, not to destroy, to build. Because when their tower fell, and it would, someone would need to show people how to build on solid ground again. And I already had the blueprint. Some men go loud when they're wronged. I went quiet. The kind of quiet you learn working around machines that can kill you if you flinch. I didn't chase rumors or bitterness. I chased patterns. By the time most people know something's wrong, the evidence is already rotting in the walls. But I knew where to look. I started with the vendors. I still had relationships, people who owed me favors, or who just remembered I treated them like humans when we were small. A few phone calls, casual, friendly, no pressure. But the things they told me, unpaid invoices, orders rerouted without notice, logistics subcontracts signed under LLCs that didn't match any known company records. One guy, Leo, ran a freight consolidation firm we used during our expansion into the Northeast Corridor. Told me flat out. They stopped answering us. Mike. Sent a generic email about pivoting the fulfillment model and then ghosted. We're out 70 grand. That's not pivoting. That's bleeding without a tourniquet. Then came the numbers. I still had a login to our old analytics sandbox, a testing environment I built, and nobody ever sunset. They assumed it was deprecated, but it still piped in. Partial data feeds from the central logistics system, enough to see trends. Inventory cycles were misaligned. Freight costs had quietly ballooned, 22% quarter over quarter. The system was compensating by cutting routes and compressing delivery windows, which meant burnouts at the driver level and higher failure rates. It wasn't fraud exactly. It was delusion. The kind that happens when someone thinks you can replace wisdom with automation. Then I found the presentation. Someone, probably one of the interns, had left it public on the cloud server. It was a quarterly performance deck prepared for investors. I recognized parts of it immediately. Charts I had made years ago, just rebranded. But the projections were fiction. They had smoothed out the dip in delivery reliability, inflated customer retention metrics, and completely scrubbed the section. On penalty clauses from missed deadlines. They were dressing up rot in a velvet box. I didn't screenshot it, didn't save the file. I just stared at it for a long time. It wasn't personal anymore. This was something else. A company so terrified of looking weak it was willing to snap its own bones for posture. And the worst part? No one inside seemed to see it. Or they saw it and said nothing. I remember leaning back in my chair, the window open, the spring wind lifting the edges of the papers on my desk. The smell of cut grass outside. Children yelling somewhere far off. Felt not vindicated. Not yet, but aligned. They thought I'd disappear, but I was watching. Not for revenge, not to destroy, to build. Because when their tower fell, and it would, someone would need to show people how to build on solid ground again. And I already had the blueprint. It started with a tweet. Harmless looking, a blurry photo of a warehouse. Dock, crates stacked haphazardly, the caption simple. 3 days late. 4th time this quarter. What's going on, Oaxion Logi? I wouldn't have seen it if it hadn't been retweeted by someone I used to mentor. I almost scrolled past, but something about the tone stopped me. It wasn't angry. It was tired. I clicked. And there it was. Thread after thread. Missed. Shipments. Faulty deliveries. Broken cold chain compliance for pharma products. One post even mentioned the wrong cargo routed to a hospital supply facility. A hospital. People were whispering the word no ops team ever wants floating around. Unsafe. I opened my inbox. Messages waiting. Leo, the freight guy, had sent me a forwarded notice. Axion had defaulted on one of their escrow agreements. A penalty clause triggered. Mid-7 figures. Then Susan, a vendor manager from our first expansion zone, emailed me. Subject. You were right. The body was one line. The system's eating itself. It escalated fast. That week, 2 mid-tier clients issued breach notices. One pharmaceutical client, small but high profile, pulled their contract and took it public. A LinkedIn post by their COO exploded overnight. The words irresponsible and reckless trended. By Friday, the co-founders were on damage control, press statements, internal memos, talks of agile reorientation, and transformational pivots. It was like watching someone throw buckets of water at a glass fire. I got a call from someone inside. A quiet voice. A logistics lead who had worked under me for years. Mike, the routing algorithm's misfiring. Badly. It's sending perishable inventory to secondary hubs with no cold storage. We flagged it, but Bryce overrode the warnings. Said it was just a temporary load balancing error. But it's not. It's deep. I didn't say I knew. Didn't say I warned them. Just listened. Then, 2 days later, it hit the press. Axion Logistics under scrutiny after major client walkout, system failures. The article quoted a source who described chronic underestimation of operational risk and abandonment of legacy systems without institutional oversight. They didn't name me, but I could feel my fingerprints underneath every sentence. The fallout was surgical. Investors began to pull. The share value, private but internally tracked, dropped by 38% in under a week. Staff started posting cryptic farewells. Grateful for my time. On to the next chapter. What a ride. And Bryce, gone. Scrubbed. From the website, bio page redirected to a 404, the very man who once laughed while calling me obsolete. Deleted like a bad line of code. I stood by the window of my apartment the night the news broke wide. The city lights flickered like old circuitry. The air smelled of ozone, a storm coming in. I didn't feel joy. Not really. But I felt something else. Readiness. It wasn't just a collapse. It was space. Room to build. Room to restore what they had forgotten. And right on cue, the emails started. Coming. It started with one message. Subject line. Are you open to a conversation? A modest logistics startup from the Pacific Northwest. Newer, smaller, but with smart roots. They'd seen the article. Read between the lines. Someone had tipped them off. The systems guy behind the old Axion engine, the real one, isn't with them anymore. Then came another message. An old colleague, now at a global supply chain firm, German, precise, legacy-driven, reached out with warmth that surprised me. "Mike, we've been following Axion's decay closely. We always assumed someone more grounded was behind its golden era. Your name came up a lot." He attached a briefing deck, custom-built title slide. "Operation Keystone. A proposal for your leadership." I hadn't even spoken to anyone yet, and they were already calling it mine. Suddenly I was fielding 3, then 5, then 9 offers, consulting retainers, CTO roles. One wanted me to design a full-stack fulfillment ecosystem from scratch. Their exact words were, "We'll give you a lab, a budget, and total control." It was like watching my name get reassembled in real time, but not in loud headlines, in quiet reverence, the kind that comes when people see not just what you built, but why you built it that way. I took my time, said no more than I said yes, because I didn't just want a job. I wanted alignment, not with money, not with prestige, with people who still believed in depth over flash, craft over convenience. One woman I spoke to, the founder of a sustainability-focused freight consortium, said something I haven't forgotten. "We're not looking for the next flashy miracle. We're looking for the last honest engineer." I told her I wasn't an engineer. She smiled through the call. "Exactly." And beneath all that, there was one other message, short, from a company email domain I recognized instantly. My old one, Axion, from Julian, one of the co-founders, the one who couldn't meet my eyes in the hallway. "Mike, can we talk? Things have changed. I think we made a mistake." No punctuation at the end. Just silence. I stared at that message for a long time, not because I didn't know how to respond, but because I did. I didn't reply right away. Julian's email sat in my inbox like a stone in a river, unmoving, cold, catching the current around it. I read it once, then again. Just 17 words. No apology, no ownership, just need. And I recognized the tone, not remorse. Panic. They didn't want me. They wanted rescue. The kind that comes with blueprints and institutional memory and a name the market still respected. I thought about it. Not just for a day, for a week. I walked through the old port district, where we used to run pilot deliveries. The cobblestones were cracked now, the signage faded. But I remembered how it felt. Chasing problems, fixing things, earning trust one pallet at a time. Remembered what we were before ego came in wearing a suit and said it could code its way past friction. And for a moment, a quiet, flickering moment, I thought, maybe I should go back, help right the ship, restore what mattered. But then I pictured the conference room the day they let me go. The hollow nods, the way no one stood, the way I disappeared from the org chart before I'd even left the parking lot. And I thought of the interns who tried to replace me with flowcharts, the executives who confused dashboards with wisdom, the silence when things broke and no one called to ask why. I opened Julian's email, typed just one line. "You didn't make a mistake. You made a decision." And then, after a pause, "Now I'm making mine." No signature, no warmth, just clarity. I hit send, felt the tension release from somewhere deep in my shoulders. Not triumph, not satisfaction, just freedom. The kind you don't announce. The kind that comes when you finally stop asking others to remember your worth and begin living it instead. That night, I opened my notebook again, the one I started the night I walked away. I flipped past the first page, let the collapse come, and wrote something new beneath it. Now build. It didn't happen overnight, but it began, slowly, deliberately, the way a good structure always does, with ground testing, with silence, with a single conviction. This time, we don't scale lies, we scale trust. The first hire was someone they'd called too junior back then. A quiet thinker. I'd watched her run circles around managers who never noticed her. The second was a warehouse veteran, late 50s. Knew freight like it was blood circulation. They phased him out under the banner of efficiency. I called him the day I signed the lease on the new space. He cried. Didn't say much, just, "I thought we were done, Mike." "We're just getting started," I told him. We didn't call it a company, not at first. It was a workshop, a living blueprint. Every policy was written in pencil. Every process tested under the same question. Would this hold if the lights went out and it was just us, hand to hand, solving things with no dashboards? Word got around, not in press releases, in whispers, the kind that travel between people, who've had enough of pretending they're replaceable. People started asking to join. Veterans, young ones, even a few ex-Axion folks, the ones who'd left before the rot took over. We called it Keel. A reminder, the part of the ship no one sees, but that holds everything steady. We didn't promise disruption, we promised stability. Not flashy, faithful, not fast, true. And one day, sitting in the corner of our modest shared office, laptop humming, coffee cooling beside me, someone walked in and said, "Mike, they're done. Axion, filing for restructuring. Assets frozen. Investigations open." A full-page headline ran the next morning. The system that ate itself. How Axion ignored its foundation and collapsed. They never mentioned my name. They didn't need to. I closed the paper, placed it gently aside, and got back to work. We weren't there to gloat. We were there to build what lasts, and if you asked me what I felt that morning, watching the end of what I once gave my years to, I'd tell you the truth. I felt still. Like a man finally walking the land he planted, not to harvest revenge, but to grow something clean. Something that doesn't forget the hands that shaped it. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. They can throw you out like trash. But your value doesn't live in their hands. It lives in your quiet, in your craft, in the choices you make when no one is clapping. That's where legacy begins. If you've ever felt overlooked or underestimated, this story is for you. Because real strength isn't in the noise of the moment, it's in the quiet decisions that define your legacy. If you want to hear more stories about resilience, integrity, and the power of patience, make sure to click on the video right here, subscribe for more deep dives, and share your thoughts below. Have you ever faced a moment when you had to choose between walking away or building something new? I'm listening.